After my dad got sick, he suddenly cut me off without a word. It didn't take long to realize his new wife was behind it. I had no idea why until her own son told me the shocking truth. So he and I teamed up, exposed everything, and publicly destroyed the life she built on lies and manipulation. My mother passed away during my birth, so my father and I naturally shared an exceptionally close bond. Growing up, he was my ultimate hero, the kind of dad who managed demanding double shifts yet never missed a single school play. I recall waking at dawn to find him dressed, ready to present me with a costume, declaring it was Disney watching day. Even when I faced bullying at school and the principal seemed unwilling to intervene, my father strode directly into the office. His imposing stature, being 6 feet 6 inches and 250 pounds, quickly compelled the principal to resolve the issue. He consistently assured me, "No matter what happens, kiddo, I'll always be in your corner." That commitment remained steadfast throughout my later years, even through my divorce 3 years ago, when Dad drove 14 hours straight just to help me pack belongings and offer his comfort. However, something unexpected occurred last year. He called me out of the blue, casually revealing his Parkinson's diagnosis. It felt like a physical blow. He kept insisting it was mild, nothing serious yet, but my worry was relentless. Even worse, 2 weeks later, he ceased answering my calls entirely. I couldn't bear it. I immediately booked a flight to Arizona, hoping perhaps he was just feeling self-conscious. But upon my arrival, he was different, barely making eye contact. And Diane, a woman he had only been seeing for a few months, hovered over him like a protective sentinel. My father barely allowed me to greet him before he coldly stated I was negative and draining. When I asked for clarification, he explained he needed positive energy around him due to his illness, and that meant keeping his distance from me. The pain was immense. I could barely breathe. I couldn't comprehend its source. I attempted to press him for more details, but Diane interjected, warning that emotional displays would worsen his condition. I left his house feeling utterly hollow. The subsequent 8 months were agonizing. Every message I sent went unanswered, so I sought therapy to cope. Eventually, mutual acquaintances revealed the shocking news. Dad had married Diane. He had even begun referring to her son, Connor, as his own. Seeing photographs on social media intensified the hurt. He appeared gaunt, pale, a shadow of the vibrant man who had raised me. Then, unexpectedly, almost a year later, after I had begun to accept the situation, Connor contacted me, sounding anxious and frightened. I had never even met him, but his sincerity was compelling enough for me to listen. Connor disclosed that Diane had been isolating my father from everyone who cared for him. She had convinced him that his Parkinson's would eventually make him a burden to me, which was why he had severed contact. What was more alarming, Connor discovered she had taken control of my father's finances, altered his will, and even managed his phone and emails. He had overheard her conversing with lawyers, planning to place my father in a care facility once she completed transferring all his assets. But the moment that truly shattered my heart was when Connor mentioned how Dad kept a photograph of me hidden in his desk drawer. Connor had occasionally caught him looking at it when Diane was absent, quietly weeping. One day, when Diane was out, Connor asked my father about the photo, and Dad simply replied that he had already burned the bridge with me, that there was no turning back, and that Diane was likely correct about him becoming a burden due to his illness. That's when Connor realized he had to inform me of the truth. I was consumed with fury. I recall asking Connor to gather evidence of Diane's manipulation, and he succeeded. He recorded their conversations, clearly capturing the extent of her scheme. So, together, Connor and I devised a strategy. We located an elder law attorney who affirmed we possessed sufficient proof to intervene. I drove to confront Diane. The moment she opened the door, she attempted to dismiss me, but Connor was present. He pulled out his phone and began playing the recordings. She stared at him in disbelief, then erupted, screaming about her own son's betrayal. My father remained motionless, listening to the recording, his eyes wide with shock. Diane repeatedly tried to interrupt, shouting at Connor that he was a traitor, yelling at me to leave, but we stood our ground. Finally, I knelt before Dad. I reminded him how he had fulfilled the roles of both parents, making my childhood extraordinary. And I recalled the promise he had always made me. I told him it was my turn to promise him. I'll always be in your corner too, Dad. I'm not leaving this time. He finally broke down, looking at me again, tears streaming down his face. He confessed he had pushed me away because Diane had instilled terror in him that he would ruin my life if I had to care for him. He had believed her falsehoods because his love for me was so profound that becoming a burden was his greatest dread. I departed the house with him that day, assuring him he could reside with me. Connor also left. But this ordeal was far from concluded. Over the subsequent days, Connor and I resolved to meticulously document everything. He began by photographing Dad's living conditions at Diane's house, including the locked medicine cabinet, and capturing screenshots of every financial record he could access. The divorce proceedings commenced swiftly. Dad's lawyer, Taylor, was astonished when I presented the evidence of financial exploitation. Diane had been transferring funds from Dad's accounts to hers for months. She had also added her name to his house deed without his complete understanding. Taylor assured us we had a compelling case. Diane did not yield gracefully. She appeared at my apartment 3 days after Dad moved in with me. She pounded on the door and shrieked that I was stealing her husband. My neighbors contacted the police, who instructed her to leave but could do little else. Connor remained with us that night, concerned his mother might return. The court hearings were draining. Dad's Parkinson's symptoms worsened under the stress. His hands trembled more, and sometimes he struggled to articulate words. I took time off work to transport him to appointments and court dates. Connor testified against his own mother, informing the judge how she had isolated Dad and controlled his medication. I could see how deeply it pained him to do this, but he knew it was the right course of action. After 3 months, the judge ruled in Dad's favor. Not only did he regain possession of his house, but Diane was compelled to return all the money she had taken, plus interest. She was left with only her personal belongings and her vehicle. The expression on her face when the judgment was read still haunts me. Pure animosity directed at me. We believed it was over. We were mistaken. Diane initiated a campaign to tarnish our reputations. She informed everyone at Dad's church that I was pursuing his money. She contacted my workplace and told my supervisor I was pilfering Dad's medication to sell. My boss, Jordan, did not believe her, but it was mortifying to have to explain the situation. Then she targeted Connor. She told his girlfriend that Connor suffered from severe mental problems and had a history of aggression. His girlfriend, Casey, nearly ended their relationship until he presented her with all the court documents. Casey subsequently became one of our staunchest allies. Dad's health continued to decline. 6 months after moving in with me, he required a walker full-time. His neurologist, Dr. Susan, adjusted his medications, but the disease was advancing more rapidly than anticipated. Connor visited almost daily, assisting Dad with exercises and bringing him books about classic automobiles, which they read together. Diane discovered new methods to harass us. She created fraudulent social media accounts in my name and posted vile content, making it appear as though I was neglecting Dad. I had to contact the platforms to have the accounts removed. She sent packages to our residence. On one occasion, it was a box of withered flowers with a note stating, "This is what happens to thieves." The police could do little, as she was careful to remain just within legal boundaries. Officer Ree suggested we seek a restraining order, which we did. The judge granted it, but Diane found ways to circumvent it. She would park just beyond the legal distance from our house and observe us. She would send friends to check on Dad, who would then report back to her. Connor was incredible throughout all of this. He confronted Diane whenever she attempted to manipulate him. Once, she feigned illness to entice him to visit, then tried to persuade him I was drugging Dad. Connor recorded the conversation and played it for her, informing her he would not visit again if she persisted in lying. It worked for a while. A year after the divorce, Dad suffered a fall and fractured his hip. The surgery was successful, but recovery was challenging due to his Parkinson's. I hired a part-time nurse named Alex to assist when I was at work. Dad resented needing more help, but eventually formed a bond with Alex over their shared fondness for old films. Diane somehow learned of the fall and appeared at the hospital. She informed the staff she was still his wife and nearly gained access to his room before Connor arrived and clarified the situation. The hospital increased security after that incident. As Dad grew weaker, Connor and I discussed relocating him to a care facility. We visited several places, but couldn't find one that felt suitable. Dad overheard us deliberating and became distressed. He didn't want to be stored away, as he phrased it. We promised to keep him home for as long as possible. 2 years after Dad moved in with me, Diane made her most audacious move. She filed a lawsuit asserting Dad lacked mental competence when he divorced her and that I had manipulated him. Her lawyer, a disreputable individual named John, demanded new medical evaluations. Dad had to endure hours of questioning by medical professionals and attorneys. The stress caused his symptoms to worsen dramatically. He developed pneumonia shortly thereafter and required hospitalization. Connor and I took turns staying with him, fearing Diane might attempt something. The judge dismissed Diane's case after Dad's long-standing doctor testified about his mental clarity despite his physical limitations. Diane was ordered to cover our legal expenses. She left the courthouse screaming that we would regret this. 3 days later, someone slashed my tires. We couldn't prove it was Diane, but Connor installed security cameras around my house the next day. The footage captured Diane attempting to break in through the back door a week later. This time, the police arrested her for violating the restraining order. She spent 2 nights in jail before being released on bail. The terms of her release included maintaining a distance of at least 500 feet from us and wearing an ankle monitor. For the first time in years, we experienced a sense of relief. Dad's condition continued to deteriorate. By the 3rd year, he required assistance with most daily activities. Connor moved into my spare bedroom to help provide care. We established a routine. Connor managed mornings before work, Alex arrived during the day, and I took evenings and nights. Diane's ankle monitor was removed after 6 months of compliance. Within a week, she began sending letters to Dad, pleading for forgiveness and asserting her continued affection for him. Dad read the first one, then asked us to discard any others that arrived. As Dad approached his 70th birthday, he became more introspective. His speech was now challenging to comprehend, but he diligently worked to recount stories from his life before Parkinson's. He made me promise to live fully and not devote my youth to caring for him. I promised, even though I had no intention of placing him in a facility. We celebrated his birthday quietly at home. Connor brought a small cake, and Alex joined us after their shift. Dad managed to extinguish the candles with assistance. It was a pleasant day. 2 weeks later, Dad developed another respiratory infection. The doctor explained that his swallowing difficulties were causing him to aspirate food into his lungs. We had to make the difficult decision to insert a feeding tube. Diane somehow learned of this and contacted Adult Protective Services, alleging we were starving him. The caseworker, quickly determined Dad was receiving excellent care and closed the investigation, but the stress of the visit exhausted Dad. That night, with Connor and me seated beside his bed, Dad squeezed my hand and whispered that he was proud of us both. By morning, he was gone, peacefully in his sleep. Diane appeared at the funeral despite our objections. She wore black and assumed the role of the grieving widow, but no one was deceived. Connor publicly requested her departure, and surprisingly, she complied without argument. The reading of Dad's will revealed his final message to Diane. He left her his forgiveness, but nothing else. Everything went to Connor and me, with instructions to allocate some of the funds to establish a Parkinson's research fund in his name. It has been 6 months since Dad passed. Diane has finally ceased contacting us. Connor believes she has found someone new to manipulate. I hope whoever it is sees through her more quickly than Dad did. Connor and I still meet weekly for dinner. We discuss Dad and the cherished memories from before Diane. Sometimes, it still aches, but mostly we are thankful for the time we had with him after rescuing him from her influence. I still have the security cameras active. Old habits truly persist. Last night, I awoke to an alert on my phone. The security camera had detected movement at my front door at 2 a.m. I reviewed the footage, my heart pounding. It was Diane, standing there for nearly 10 minutes before departing. She did not knock or attempt to enter. She simply stood, gazing at the door as if gathering the resolve to act. The moonlight cast eerie shadows across her face, making her appear almost spectral on my screen. I did not inform Connor about it. He is finally beginning to move forward, and I don't wish to draw him back into her drama. Besides, we both had endured enough of her manipulations during Dad's illness. 3 days later, I discovered a letter in my mailbox. No stamp, just my name inscribed in Diane's elaborate handwriting. The envelope was subtly scented with that sickly sweet jasmine perfume she always wore. I almost discarded it unread, but curiosity prevailed. It was 4 pages long, detailing her remorse, how much she missed Dad, and her desire to reconcile with Connor and me. She asserted she was undergoing therapy and had experienced an epiphany regarding her behavior. The pages were adorned with what appeared to be tear stains, strategically placed for maximum emotional impact. At the conclusion, she inquired if we could meet for coffee to discuss matters. I immediately called Connor. He was silent as I read him the letter. He remarked he had heard such pronouncements from her before, usually when she desired something. The familiar weariness in his voice transported me back to all those family dinners ruined by Diane's abrupt mood shifts. We decided to disregard it, hoping she would eventually surrender and leave us in peace. The following week, Diane appeared at Connor's workplace. His colleagues reported she was weeping and causing a scene in the lobby, clutching a framed photograph of Dad and recounting her devastating loss to anyone who would listen. Connor refused to see her, and security ultimately escorted her out. That night, she called me 15 times. I did not answer, but each ring sent a fresh wave of apprehension through me. The calls persisted for days. Then came more letters, then emails. She even contacted some of our mutual acquaintances, claiming we were cruelly excluding her after Dad's death, when all she desired was to grieve with her family. Some individuals actually called us, questioning why we were being so harsh to a grieving widow. One of Dad's oldest friends, unaware of the full details of their divorce, left me a voicemail expressing disappointment in our conduct. Connor and I met for our weekly dinner at the Italian restaurant Dad used to frequent. Over plates of barely touched pasta, we formulated a plan. We would meet her once in a public setting with clear boundaries. We would listen to her, but make no commitments. If she exhibited any signs of her former manipulative behavior, we would depart immediately. Connor appeared exhausted, the dark circles beneath his eyes mirroring mine. We selected a bustling coffee shop downtown, deliberately choosing a table near the exit. Diane arrived 20 minutes early. I observed her through the window, seemingly rehearsing a speech and dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She had dressed the part of the grieving widow in a subdued black ensemble that I knew she would never choose to wear. Connor squeezed my hand as we entered, his palm clammy with nervous perspiration. Diane was on her best behavior initially. She wept about how much she missed Dad, carefully wiping away tears before they could mar her makeup. She apologized for any past misunderstandings. She spoke of her therapy and her new spiritual journey, mentioning self-help books and meditation techniques. Then she arrived at the true purpose of all this effort. She desired us to rectify the record with Dad's lawyer concerning his final wishes. She insisted Dad had promised her the lake house, not Connor, and that there must have been an error in the will. Connor calmly reminded her that Dad had revised his will after their divorce, and everything was legally binding and final. Diane's expression shifted. Then the facade crumbled, and I witnessed the cold, calculating gaze I remembered from when she was embezzling from Dad. Her eyes hardened, and her mouth formed that thin line I had come to dread. She stated that if we did not assist her, she might have to disclose some unsettling information about Dad's mental state in his final years to her lawyer. We left instantly. Connor was trembling with rage in the car, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We drove directly to Dad's lawyer's office and cautioned him about Diane's threats. He assured us the will was robust, especially since Dad had been medically evaluated specifically to preempt such claims. The lawyer's office felt like a haven, with its leather chairs and bookshelves, a place where Diane's turmoil could not reach us. 2 weeks later, Diane filed a lawsuit contesting Dad's will. She asserted he was not mentally competent when he altered it after their divorce. She had somehow persuaded Dad's former home health aide to testify that he seemed confused in his final months. We later discovered she had offered the aide money, preying on her financial difficulties after a recent divorce. The lawsuit dragged on for months. We were forced to share Dad's medical records, private journals, and emails to prove his sound mind. It felt like losing him all over again, having strangers scrutinize his personal thoughts and judge his mental capacity. I wept the day his journal entries were read aloud in court, his private reflections on his illness, and his hopes for Connor and me after his passing. During this period, Dad's Parkinson's Research Fund received its inaugural significant grant. Connor and I attended the ceremony where they announced the funding for a promising new treatment approach. The research center was filled with physicians and scientists who spoke of Dad with immense respect, detailing how his contributions had accelerated their work. I wish Dad could have been there to witness it. His name was inscribed on a plaque in the research center's lobby, the brass letters gleaming as we walked by. Diane attempted to attend the ceremony as well, but security prevented her entry based on our prior warning. We observed her watching from across the street, her face contorted with resentment. The judge ultimately dismissed Diane's lawsuit. The medical evidence was unequivocal, and Dad's doctors testified that while his body was failing, his mind had remained sharp until nearly the end. His primary physician described how Dad had discussed current events and complex family matters with perfect clarity just weeks before his death. The judge also mandated Diane to cover our substantial legal fees. We believed that would be the conclusion. We were mistaken. Diane began appearing at our friends' homes, fabricating elaborate tales about how we had manipulated Dad and absconded with her rightful inheritance. She created social media accounts dedicated to exposing us, posting old family photographs with captions that distorted the truth. She even contacted my employer, claiming I had stolen jewelry from her house during Dad's illness. I had to endure an uncomfortable meeting, explaining the situation, mortified that my professional life was being sullied by her falsehoods. Connor discovered her sitting in her car outside his apartment one night. When he confronted her, she claimed she merely wished to converse, but he noticed a folder of papers on her passenger seat with my address and work schedule inscribed upon them. He captured photographs with his phone before she drove away, his hands trembling so violently he could barely press the button. We sought a restraining order the next day. The judge granted it based on the escalating pattern of harassment. Diane was ordered to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from us, our residences, and our workplaces. The courthouse felt cold and impersonal, but I felt a wave of relief when the judge signed the order. For a few weeks, things were quiet. Then Connor called me in a panic. Someone had broken into his apartment while he was at work. Nothing valuable was taken, but his photo albums of Dad were missing, along with Dad's old watch that Connor had inherited. We knew it was Diane, but lacked proof. The thought of her hands on those precious memories made me physically ill. The police took a report, but seemed largely uninterested. They stated that without evidence, there was little they could do. I upgraded my security system and provided Connor with a spare key to my place should he ever feel unsafe. We began checking in with each other multiple times a day, a new routine born of shared anxiety. A month later, we received unexpected news. Diane had been arrested for breaking into the home of her new boyfriend's ex-wife. She had been captured on camera stealing personal items and installing hidden recording devices. The boyfriend, whom we later learned was a recently widowed man she had met at a grief support group, immediately ended their relationship. The police report detailed items in her possession that matched Connor's missing mementos. With Diane facing criminal charges and the restraining order still in effect, we finally experienced some tranquility. Connor and I focused on honoring Dad's memory in constructive ways. We volunteered at a Parkinson's awareness walk, donated books to Dad's favorite library, and embarked on a trip to the mountains where we used a vacation as a family before Diane entered our lives. Standing on the same overlook where Dad had taught us to identify bird calls, I felt his presence more profoundly than I had since his funeral. Dad's illness had advanced rapidly in his final year. The tremors worsened, and he required assistance with basic tasks. But he never complained. He told us he was thankful for the time he had regained after leaving Diane, even if it was shorter than we had all hoped. He said those last 2 years were more valuable than the 10 he had spent under Diane's influence. I remember his smile the day we moved him into his new apartment, how he traced his fingers along the walls and declared, "This place is just mine. No bad memories here." I still review my security cameras every morning. Old habits truly endure, but these days, I am not searching for Diane. I am simply ensuring the outside world remains where it belongs while I safeguard Dad's memory within. Sometimes I ponder what Dad would think of me now. It has been 3 years since he passed. The Parkinson's claimed him more swiftly than any of us anticipated. But those final few years after Diane were the happiest I had seen him since Mom's passing. The divorce was surprisingly swift once we secured the right legal representation. Joseph Winters was a formidable attorney who specialized in cases involving financial abuse. His reputation preceded him, silver-haired with penetrating blue eyes that seemed to discern falsehoods before they were even uttered. He assisted Dad in documenting everything. The forged signatures on bank withdrawals, the concealed accounts in offshore banks, the gifts Diane had pressured him to bestow upon her family members. Dad's medical records, revealing his early Parkinson's diagnosis that Diane had kept secret from everyone, sealed the outcome. She had been aware of his condition for nearly a year before any of us were, all while systematically depleting his retirement accounts. The judge was not merely sympathetic. She was incensed. I will never forget her expression when she ordered Diane to return every single penny, plus interest. Her usually composed judicial demeanor fractured as she leaned forward, addressing Diane directly about predatory behavior towards a vulnerable adult. Diane forfeited the sprawling Victorian house she had convinced Dad to put in her name, the 2 luxury cars, and access to Dad's substantial retirement funds. Dad did not even seek retribution. He simply desired what was rightfully his, what he had labored 40 years to build. Dad relocated back into the main house with me after the divorce. His Parkinson's was worsening, but he managed with medication and physical therapy 3 times a week at the downtown clinic. Some days were better than others. On good days, he would assist me in the garden, his hands steady enough to plant the tomato seedlings he adored. Or he would play chess with Connor, still astute enough to win most games. On challenging days, he primarily rested and read books, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, a blanket draped across his lap, even in summer. We believed we were finished with Diane, but we were mistaken. She began calling Dad incessantly, alternating between begging for money and threatening to disseminate lies about him. Her voice would shift from tearful to venomous in mere seconds. Dad blocked her number after the 15th call in 2 days. Then she started appearing at our house unannounced, pounding on the door, peering through windows. We had to obtain a restraining order, which meant another exhausting day in court, watching Dad attempt to conceal his tremors as he testified. Connor was caught in the middle. He loved his mother, but could not disregard her actions. He visited her once a month at a coffee shop, a neutral territory where neither could feel trapped. He informed us she was residing in a small apartment across town, and working at Macy's in the perfume department. She consistently inquired about Dad's health and our finances, fishing for information with practiced nonchalance. Connor never revealed anything significant, deflecting with vague assurances that we were all well. 3 months after the divorce, Diane created fraudulent social media accounts, impersonating Dad's old friends. She utilized these to circulate rumors that Dad had embezzled money from his company before retirement. The posts were cleverly crafted, with just enough specific details to appear credible. Dad's former colleagues called to ascertain his well-being. We had to explain the situation to everyone, witnessing Dad's face crumple with each call. Dad's former boss, Mr. Thompson, knew Dad would never steal and helped clear his name, dispatching a company-wide email defending Dad's character and 40 years of impeccable service. Dad's tremors intensified in the fall. The doctor, a specialist with gentle hands and a direct manner, increased his medication, but it caused him dizziness and nausea. He fell once in the bathroom. The sound of his body hitting the tile floor still haunts my dreams. Fortunately, I was home and heard him call for assistance, his voice thin with pain and embarrassment. After that, we installed grab bars, a shower seat, and non-slip mats throughout the house. Connor stayed with us more frequently to help, sleeping on the sofa in the den so he could hear if Dad needed anything during the night. Diane somehow learned of Dad's worsening condition, likely from questioning Connor too closely. She appeared at his doctor's office during an appointment, wearing a conservative outfit and her concerned wife expression. She claimed to be his wife, speaking with such conviction that the new receptionist, unaware of the situation, almost believed her. The receptionist contacted me, and I rushed over, my heart pounding. Diane was telling the doctor she should be making Dad's medical decisions. I presented the doctor with their divorce papers and the restraining order, my hands shaking almost as much as Dad's. Diane was escorted out by security, hurling accusations all the way to the parking lot. Next, she attempted to contact Dad's bank. She claimed Dad was no longer mentally competent to manage his finances and that she should be granted access as his caretaker. The bank manager, who had known Dad for years, called Dad to verify, and we swiftly thwarted her attempt. Dad added me as a co-signer on his accounts, just to be safe, his signature wobbly but resolute on the bank forms. Winter arrived, and Dad's health further declined. The tremors spread to both hands, and his balance problems worsened. He moved into the downstairs guest room because the stairs became too challenging, even with the banister we had installed. Connor installed a ramp at the front door for Dad's walker, dedicating an entire weekend to measuring, sawing, and hammering, determined to make it perfect. Diane's next action was truly abhorrent. She contacted Adult Protective Services and reported that I was abusing Dad and embezzling his money. A social worker named Jamie, with weary eyes and a compassionate smile, came to investigate. She interviewed Dad privately, inspected our home, and reviewed our financial records. Jamie quickly determined the report was false and meticulously documented everything in case Diane tried again. She provided us with her direct number, just in case. Dad was incensed by Diane's accusation. He drafted a letter to Diane's supervisor at the department store, detailing her harassment in painstaking detail, his handwriting becoming increasingly illegible as his anger and tremors intensified. I don't know if he ever sent it. He simply needed to vent his fury on paper, the words a poor substitute for the confrontation his failing body would not permit. By spring, Dad required more assistance. We hired a part-time nurse named Michael, who came 3 days a week, his cheerful efficiency brightening our increasingly medicalized home. Michael instructed me on how to assist Dad with his exercises and how to make eating easier when his hands trembled severely, demonstrating how to adapt utensils and prepare foods that preserved Dad's dignity. Dad liked Michael because they shared an interest in baseball, spending hours discussing historic games and controversial calls. Connor graduated from college that May with honors in engineering. Dad was determined to attend the ceremony despite his health. We obtained a wheelchair with special cushions and arranged for preferential seating near the stage. Dad beamed with pride watching Connor accept his diploma, tears streaming down his face unnoticed. Diane was also present, seated far from us in a flamboyant red dress. She attempted to approach after the ceremony, but Connor firmly told her it was not the appropriate time or place, his voice low but resolute. He promised to meet her for coffee the following day instead, a promise I could see he dreaded keeping. At that coffee meeting, Diane informed Connor she was relocating to Arizona for a fresh start. Connor was relieved but suspicious, knowing his mother's patterns too well. A week later, we discovered she had not moved at all. She was renting an apartment just a few blocks from our house, using a different name. The landlord recognized Dad from a photograph and called to warn us, uncomfortable with the deception he had uncovered. Summer brought more challenges. Dad's speech became slurred, making communication difficult. I purchased a letterboard to help him express himself when words failed. And we developed a system of gestures and expressions that became our private language. Despite everything, he retained his sense of humor. When I prepared his favorite garlic chicken and inadvertently used too much salt, he pointed to the salt shaker and then gave me a thumbs down, laughing silently, his eyes crinkling with amusement. Diane's final attempt to intrude into our lives occurred in September. She filed a lawsuit claiming Dad had promised to provide for her financially for life. She produced emails that appeared to be from Dad, but the dates corresponded to periods when his Parkinson's was so severe he could not type or even use a computer. The case was dismissed when her evidence was proven fraudulent. The judge's rebuke was scathing and public. Connor finally reached his breaking point with his mother. He informed her he could not maintain a relationship with her until she sought professional help and ceased trying to harm us. He stated he loved her, but could not bear to watch her destroy herself and others. Diane wept and vowed to change. But Connor had heard those promises before. In childhood after broken promises, in adolescence after embarrassing incidents, in adulthood after manipulations were exposed. Dad's condition worsened rapidly in October. The doctors stated the disease was progressing faster than anticipated, his professional demeanor slightly faltering as he delivered the news. We arranged for hospice care at home. Dad was clear that he wished to remain in his house until the end, surrounded by his books and the garden. He could now only see through the window. Friends and former colleagues visited to bid farewell. Dad could not speak much, but his eyes conveyed that he understood everything. Connor took a leave from his new job to spend more time with us. We sat with Dad, read to him, and played his favorite music, jazz standards that sometimes made his fingers tap in rhythm, even when he could not otherwise control them. On a quiet November morning, with the first snow falling outside his window, Dad passed away peacefully. Connor and I were both holding his hands. His last coherent words the day before had been, "Proud of you both," uttered with immense effort, but perfectly clear. We held a small funeral. Diane did not appear, which was a relief. Dad was interred beside my mother, just as he had desired, in the cemetery on the hill overlooking the town where they had first met. A week after the funeral, Connor discovered a letter Dad had written to him months earlier, concealed in his chest. Dad had asked Connor to look after me, stating we were family now. Connor permanently moved into Dad's apartment after that, bringing his engineering books and his quiet, steadfast presence. Diane sent flowers to the house after learning of Dad's death. The card expressed her sorrow for everything. Connor and I did not respond. Some wounds are too profound for simple apologies. Some bridges too thoroughly burned to rebuild. Life continued, even with Dad's absence weighing on us. Connor and I settled into a routine. He pursued his engineering degree while I completed high school. We maintained Dad's apartment, utilizing the insurance money to cover rent. Connor meticulously managed our finances, ensuring we had sufficient funds to get by. Sometimes I would find him at the kitchen table late at night, calculator in hand, his forehead creased with concentration as he balanced our budget. 3 months after Dad died, we received a thick envelope from his lawyer. Inside were documents showing Dad had divorced Diane just before his Parkinson's took a sharp turn. He had been more astute than Diane realized, working quietly with his lawyer. He had documented her manipulation and recovered nearly everything she had taken. The paperwork indicated he had transferred his assets back into his name, leaving Diane with almost nothing. Connor read through the papers with a faint smile. He told me Dad had mentioned working on something significant, but never shared the specifics. The lawyer's note explained that Dad wished to protect what would be left for me. He had not acted out of revenge, but to secure my future. We believed that would be the end of Diane in our lives. We were mistaken. The first call came a week later. Diane claimed she was homeless and required assistance. Connor listened courteously, but declined. He informed me afterward that his mother had always been theatrical, and she had family with whom she could stay. We changed our phone number the next day. Then she appeared at our door. Her costly attire was gone, replaced by plain jeans and a worn sweater. She pleaded to speak, asserting she had changed. Connor stood firm, telling her to leave. I watched from behind him, discerning the cold calculation in her eyes even as she wept. Connor saw it too and closed the door on her pleas. The real trouble began when Diane started spreading rumors. She contacted my school counselor, alleging Connor was mistreating me. The counselor summoned me for a meeting, asking cautious questions about my home life. I explained the truth, presenting her with the legal documents naming Connor as my guardian. The counselor seemed satisfied, but the damage was commencing. Diane moved into an apartment in our building. We would encounter her in the hallway or lobby, always prepared with a sorrowful smile or a comment about how much she missed us. Connor cautioned me not to engage with her. He understood her patterns better than anyone. She began telling neighbors that Connor had stolen her money and turned me against her. Some believed her. We received frosty glances in the elevator and whispers in the laundry room. Mrs. Abernathy, who had always saved cookies for me, now hurried past with a tight-lipped nod. Connor disregarded it all, focusing on his studies and caring for me. One night, we returned home to find our door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but items had been subtly rearranged. My photo albums were open on the coffee table. Connor called a locksmith that night. We could never prove it was Diane, but we both knew. The worst came when Diane contacted my grandparents, Dad's parents. They had not been close with Dad after his marriage to Diane, but they still cared. Diane told them Connor was using Dad's money for himself, not for my care. My grandparents called, concerned. It took weeks of conversations and sharing bank statements before they grasped the truth. Throughout it all, Dad's condition worsened in my recollections. I would dream of him, his hands shaking more violently than they ever had in life. In these dreams, his face would contort with pain he had concealed from me when alive. Connor would find me weeping in the morning and sit with me, not saying much, simply being there. His quiet strength reminded me of Dad. Connor graduated with his engineering degree that spring. He secured a position at a local firm, working long hours but earning a good income. I began exploring colleges, knowing Dad would have wanted me to attend. Connor insisted we utilize the money Dad had protected for my education. Diane's attempts to harm us persisted but became more desperate. She left notes under our door, asserting Connor was just like her, manipulative and selfish. She cornered me once in the grocery store, her fingers digging into my arm as she informed me Dad had confided in her that he regretted appointing Connor as my guardian. I walked away without a word, but her fingertips left red marks that took hours to fade. Connor never spoke ill of Diane to me, despite everything. Once, when I inquired why he did not despise her, he simply stated that hating her would grant her power over him. He acknowledged her actions but refused to let them consume him. It was a maturity I admired and sought to emulate. 2 years after Dad passed, Diane made her final attempt. She filed a legal petition claiming Dad had been mentally incompetent when he divorced her and transferred his assets. The case went nowhere. Dad's doctor provided records showing he had been mentally sharp until the very end, despite his physical decline. The judge dismissed her claim and cautioned her against filing frivolous lawsuits. After that, Diane relocated. We learned through Connor's aunt that she had moved to Florida to live with a cousin. The relief was immediate, like a burden lifted from both our shoulders. That night, we ordered pizza and watched a comedy marathon, laughing more freely than we had in months. I graduated high school and commenced college. Connor dated occasionally, but remained focused on his career and checking in on me. We often discussed Dad, recalling his laughter and his terrible jokes. The sorrow of losing him never entirely vanished, but it softened with time, like a photograph fading around the edges while the image remained distinct. In my sophomore year of college, I received a call from Connor. Dad's Parkinson's medication had been part of a research study. The pharmaceutical company had identified some irregularities in their data and was reviewing patient outcomes. They wished to interview families of patients who had participated. Connor and I met with the researchers together. They posed detailed questions about Dad's symptoms and progression. At the conclusion, they thanked us for our time. A month later, we received a letter explaining that while Dad's medication had caused no harm, it had not provided the benefits they had anticipated. The study was being discontinued. It was a minor detail, but it brought Dad back to the forefront of our thoughts. That night, Connor and I played chess using Dad's old set. The carved wooden pieces were smooth from years of handling, each one holding the memory of Dad's touch. Connor had taught me the game over the years, and though I was not as skilled as either of them, I cherished the connection to Dad had offered. As we played, Connor told me he was considering purchasing a house. The apartment held too many memories, both pleasant and painful. I agreed it was time for a change. We began viewing properties the following weekend, driving through neighborhoods with coffee cups in hand, envisioning new beginnings. 3 years after Dad passed, we received a small package from Florida. Inside was Dad's watch, the one Diane had taken when she left him. There was no note, no explanation. Connor examined it carefully, ensuring it was indeed Dad's. It was, right down to the scratch on the back from when Dad had caught it on a door frame. The leather strap was worn in precisely the places where Dad's wrist had shaped it over years of wear. Connor gave the watch to me. I wore it to my college graduation the following year, feeling Dad's presence as I accepted my diploma. Connor cheered loudly from the audience, embarrassing me in precisely the way Dad would have. We never heard from Diane again. Whatever prompted her to return the watch remained her secret. Connor suggested that perhaps, in her own way, She had finally conceded defeat, or perhaps found a small measure of remorse. Life settled into a new normal. Connor met Sarah, an architect with a quick laugh and kind eyes. I completed graduate school and commenced my career. We remained close, having dinner together every Sunday, often preparing Dad's favorite recipes from the handwritten cards he had kept in a tin box. 5 years after Dad passed, Connor called me on a random Tuesday. He had been sifting through some old papers and discovered a letter Dad had written to both of us, separate from the one he had concealed in the chess set. It was dated just days before he died. In it, Dad wrote that he was proud of both of us. He thanked Connor for being the son he had never had and me for being his greatest joy. He stated that family is not always defined by blood, but always by love. His hands must have been trembling severely when he wrote it, the letters uneven and sometimes difficult to decipher, but his message was clear. We were his legacy, not his possessions or his money.